Imagine the modern world's most powerful leader waving to a cheering crowd in the middle of the day under a clean blue sky with cameras watching. Now imagine that moment snapping in half, like someone cut the film of reality with scissors. That's not just a murder, that's a nation's nervous system being struck. Today we're walking through the assassination of John F. Kennedy, not to sensationalize it, but to understand why this single event became a permanent engine for American grief and American suspicion. Because what happened next wasn't only an investigation, it was the birth of something modern. A tragedy transmitted almost live, turning into a myth that turns into a marketplace, that turns into a worldview. And somewhere in the middle of this story, America collectively discovers a terrifying truth. Wait, reality can be disputed. This is a story about evidence, ballistics, timelines, witnesses. But it's also a story about psychology, how humans handle trauma when the cause feels too small for the consequence. Set the stage, the human core. By 1963, America is deep in the Cold War. Nuclear dread isn't headline news anymore, it's just background weather. Politics is still theater, but now it's becoming a new kind of theater, television theater. And Kennedy, young, photogenic, charismatic, doesn't just lead a country, he becomes a symbol people project onto. Hope, strength, modernity, Camelot. So when he travels to Dallas, it isn't just a routine trip, it's a stage, and the audience is already there. If you've ever walked into a room and thought, wow, everyone's looking at me, congratulations, you've experienced a tiny, harmless fraction of what it means to be a head of state in the television age. Dealey Plaza, 26 seconds that wouldn't end. Around lunchtime, the motorcade turns into Dealey Plaza. The car passes the Texas School Book Depository. Then, gunfire. Here's where the story becomes both simple and impossible. Simple because an official investigation will later conclude that shots were fired from the depository and that 3 shots were fired. Impossible because the human brain isn't designed to accept one person can rewrite a nation's timeline in seconds. Then comes the artifact that changes everything. The Zapruder film, captured by Abraham Zapruder. A short, silent home movie that becomes one of the most studied pieces of footage in history. This is the moment modern conspiracy culture finds its fuel. Not because the film proves a conspiracy, but because the film makes everyone feel like a detective. And when millions of people feel like detectives, someone will always accuse the case of being solved too neatly. Also, let's be honest, give humanity a 26-second clip, and we'll form 14 factions, 3 religions, and at least 1 subreddit with color-coded arrows. What the official story said, a clean trail. Let's pause and lay down the official trail before we talk about disputes. The Warren Commission concluded shots that killed Kennedy and wounded Governor Connally were fired from the depository. Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin and acted alone. And Jack Ruby acted alone when he killed Oswald 2 days later. Whether people accepted those conclusions is a different story. Oswald is arrested. Then, before he can stand trial, Jack Ruby shoots him, publicly, dramatically, memorably. If the assassination is shock number 1, this is shock number 2. The suspect doesn't get a courtroom, he gets a headline. And now the case has a permanent wound. We never get the catharsis of a full public trial. And when humans don't get an ending, we write one. Evidence versus interpretation. Here's the paradox. The more a government says we concluded X, the more the public asks, okay, but did you earn X? And in this case, the public already had confusing eyewitness impressions, a traumatic film loop, Cold War secrecy in the background, and a suspect killed before trial. That's a perfect recipe for suspicion. The later investigation, probable conspiracy. Years later, the House Select Committee on Assassinations re-examines the case. It concludes Oswald fired 3 shots from the Depository, but also states Kennedy was probably assassinated as part of a conspiracy, largely influenced by acoustic evidence claims. And here's where confusion grows. When people hear probable conspiracy, they imagine a fully mapped villain network with name tags. But the committee's language was tied to a specific category of evidence, not a Hollywood storyboard. The acoustic evidence reversal. Then comes another twist. Science, when honest, allows correction. A later review associated with the National Academy of Sciences challenged the acoustic claim. It concluded the impulses attributed to gunshots did not reliably support a second shooter, and that timing issues undermined the famous grassy knoll interpretation. So you end up with this. One investigation says lone gunman, another says probable conspiracy, leaning on acoustics. Later scientific review says the acoustics don't hold. People hate this pattern because it feels like the ground keeps moving. But that's also how real inquiry works. Evidence is weighed, reweighed, and sometimes corrected. Science is basically humanity saying, "I'm confident," and then 10 years later showing up like, "So, about that." Why conspiracy culture sticks, the human core. Now we reach the psychological heart. There's a simple phenomenon. When the impact is enormous, people struggle to accept a small cause. A lone gunman feels emotionally too small for a presidential death in broad daylight. So the mind reaches for a cause that matches the size of the trauma. That doesn't prove conspiracy. It proves grief has logic, even when it isn't evidence. Television, the new ritual of shock. Then there's media. The assassination isn't just reported, it's experienced. The voice confirming Kennedy's death on CBS News belongs to Walter Cronkite. He announces that Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Time. That broadcast becomes part of national memory, a shared moment, a shared silence, a shared scar. And that's what turns history into myth, not falsehood, memory. The feeling of, "I was there," even if you weren't. Records, secrecy, and the forever question. Add one more ingredient, secrecy culture. Even when secrecy is irrelevant, it breeds suspicion. Recent declassifications continue to add detail about intelligence operations of the era, even if they don't produce a single dramatic, case-closed revelation. And when you mix trauma, incomplete closure, and a government that sometimes must keep secrets, you get a question that never dies. What else don't we know? The real lesson, not who, but what. The assassination of JFK is not just a murder mystery, it's a turning point in how modern societies process reality. It taught millions that images can haunt you, institutions can be doubted, and national trauma can become a permanent engine of stories. So here's the challenge. When you study this case, don't just ask who did it. Also ask, what did it do to the public mind? Because the longest-lasting impact may be that it trained generations to see history as something hidden behind a curtain. And if that makes you feel uneasy, good. A little unease is the price of taking reality seriously. If you want part 2, we can map the top conspiracy claims into 3 buckets. Claims strongly contradicted by evidence, claims that hinge on unresolved gaps, and claims that are emotionally compelling but evidentially thin. Like, subscribe, and comment. What matters more, the conclusion or the uncertainty left behind?